Hello, everyone. Welcome. Exciting day here. We're about ready to have some fun. I'm Dave Paprocki. I'm the head of marketing here at MetaRouter. Just getting things kicked off here for a little bit. So I'll kind of facilitate the first and last part of this conversation. I'm joined by my friend Scott Brinker and Patrick Harrington. So thank you both for joining us today. If you're not familiar with what MetaRouter is or what we do, ultimately we're a first mile data platform or customer data infrastructure. So we're powering the infrastructure for data collection, data empowerment, data enrichment, and activating that data. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and also what it means really in the context of AI. So we have obviously a hot topic, so much going on in the market. If you've seen some of the news from Oracle today, and we're just talking about that before we jumped on, and just legitimately something changing every day with AI. So excited to jump in this conversation and kind of where we fit in that first mile. So we'll define that for you. We'll give you some good takeaways and things to think about. And then we'll also have some we'll allow you to ask some questions along the way. We'll try to get those answered at the end or pepper them in along the way too. So without further ado, Scott, I'm going to kick it over to you and kind of help facilitate this conversation. We're really excited and we'll get things going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you. Scott Brinker. I'm the editor of ChiefMartec. I've been analyzing and writing about the evolution of the MarTech industry and its impact on marketing and business for, oh my goodness, coming up on 18 years here. I'm very excited for this conversation with Patrick, who is the head of AI and ML at MetaRouter. Patrick, you want to give folks a bit of an intro?
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and thanks, Dave. I'm Patrick Harrington. I'm head of our artificial intelligence and machine learning efforts here at MetaRouter. My career, going back to my doctorate at the University of Michigan, which started in the mathematical framing of machine learning and AI, what does learn from data mean, what are the mathematical algorithms that are associated with such, has taken me through this journey over the past 20 years of the evolution of what to do with all this data. How do we process it? How do we derive intelligence from it that impacts products and the businesses? And that spanned from anything from building out Walmart's ad platform, Walmart Connect, and their early personalization models, to working at startups, to a variety of public companies, running AI ML at Workday, Square, spanning fraud, credit risk, data and ML platform infrastructure, working in financial domain. So how to work with and derive value using these great tools with sensitive data, which has changed a lot over the years, but also just seeing kind of the whole arc in the past 2 decades. And so really excited to have this conversation with you today, Scott.
Awesome. Well, we will dive right in here. Of course, everybody is talking about AI. We've been talking about AI now here for a few years. Never seem to run out of new daily news and announcements there. But I think for a lot of folks who are running enterprise marketing, the recognition has really become that, yes, there's amazing technologies with these AI engines, but the real work is happening at a layer below that. It's the data and how we get the right data to the right place at the right time and what we do with it. And so this is all about what makes the first mile of where that data appears. So exciting. I know this is going to be our entire conversation, Patrick, but what would be the short version of, like, what is the first mile?
Yeah, this is a great point and a real critical distinction for the audience and, both synchronous and those who may follow up offline with transcript or content. Dave hit the nail on the head that we are critical customer data infrastructure, and the world is changing of how commerce happens, where it happens, when it happens, and by whom. When MetaRouter as customer data infrastructure is deployed in a customer's cloud environment, their virtual private cloud, within their security posture. And the core historical value prop of MetaRouter has been these companies that have large commerce footprints, major retailers, e-commerce providers, spend a lot of money advertising to try to bring people back to buy their goods and services. And historically, that's involved a variety of third-party tags that operate on their website to effectively listen in to what people are doing, associate with an ID representing that individual. And when they go back to Instagram or go back to Pinterest or TikTok, they can have personalized content that we're all very familiar with. MetaRouter's initial value prop was the removal of those tags that degrade on page load times, because each of those tags and the corresponding to each of the N integrations that a customer of ours may have requires those to load before the rubber hits the road and the consumer can get into it. And for folks who've kind of worked in the e-commerce domain for a while, every second is a degradation in conversion. And so by removing those tags and effectively performing an identity handshake behind the scenes on the server side, things become first party, pages load quicker, and these parties that are AI behemoths in themselves, Facebook, TikTok, et cetera, the retailers, the e-commerce providers are no longer leaking that behavioral data of what people are doing that are then used to enrich their own personalization ad targeting models that your competitors are using. And so now that we've pulled back that leakage, MetaRouter is really the main vein that sees data created by an identity before any downstream advertising destination. It could be one of the aforementioned players who I alluded to, but it also includes your data assets, your CDPs, your maybe Databricks environment, or your Snowflake environment. And all of these destinations, you can think of them as speaking their own different language. What type of schema does my retailer need to speak to Facebook, separate from TikTok, separate from Databricks? And that first mile is where MetaRouter plays ball. It allows us to resolve identity in that first mile, but it also, and we'll speak about this in a bit, allows us to add and enrich and deploy any business logic that may be relevant to that consumer or agent operating on behalf of a consumer to then route that data accordingly. So it's really kind of this notion that where data is created and born before it goes anywhere within our customer's first party view of the world.
Okay, excellent. Well, before we even dive into more of that, I just actually want to take a moment and level set here on the strategic importance of first-party data, particularly as it relates to, discussions around ad tech, that we've had over decades. So much of the data that we were using in these systems and in these strategies were essentially third-party data, right? I mean, this is why there was all the hoopla, around like Google threatening every year for a number of years to kill third-party cookies until they finally just gave up on that altogether. And all along we've sort of had this notion of, well, of course, yes, we do have this first-party data. We do ultimately identify the customer. We do have things like their order history. But to be honest, the amount of first-party data that most companies have truly been leveraging in their customer experiences has been somewhat limited. And this has really come full circle here with AI because, well, everyone's been amazed by, in particular, what these LLM, large language models are able to do. But it's always worth keeping in mind here that these models are essentially commodities. I mean, yes, you can get the OpenAI API and use it, and so can your competitor, and so can everyone else on the planet. And luckily for OpenAI, a lot of them do that, or Gemini or Anthropic, or pick your one of choice. There's not a differentiation in using these engines generically. Where all the differentiation is happening is the data that you feed into it. And at the end of the day, even like classic third-party data was never really that differentiated, but the first-party data that you have the ability to capture is an incredible asset that I think we're just now starting to see like, oh, okay, what can I actually do with this that in combination with these AI engines really changes the game of the customer experiences we can deliver. Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, this is a sea change in a way for a lot of how intellectual property is built. It's becoming much easier to interact with this distillation of human knowledge that are represented in these LLMs and multimodal models, to whether it be to author and quickly iterate with software, or I'm married to an accountant. That world is changing very much in the era of AI, paralegals, et cetera. And so it's becoming increasingly easier to not only build the intellectual property to provide customer experiences. Everyone's using the same models, plus or minus, right? And so when you look at what is not subsumed in the training corpus of these models, which are trained on really the static internet, what content is there, Wikipedia, et cetera. And yes, there are images and videos and whatnot. But what they don't have that our customer base does, and many of those in the marketing sphere who host experiences for end users to interact with their goods and services and content, and then what are interests, and people who like this also like that. That addition of the human exploring and interacting is not subsumed in these models. And that's what becomes differentiation. If you think that building intellectual property becomes increasingly trivial, your relationship with your end customers and that first party data associated with such is a key element of differentiation and increased value, given the commoditization of these other themes that we're talking about. That becomes even more critical these days.
Okay. Well, all right. There are many different things we can do in this first mile. Let's start with one that Dave had teed up for us, which is this idea of enrichment. So I have some sort of contact that happens. Someone's come to my website. They're engaging, in my online store. What am I enriching? How do I do that?
When we work with some of the largest public retailers in the United States, and we work with some of the most avant-garde large e-commerce providers, whether it be in Europe and elsewhere, we are distilling their needs, their wants, their pain points into this first mile capability. And many of these customers of ours that we help support with this critical customer data infrastructure spend billions, north of $1 billion a year in ad spend. And so they want to make sure that when you're deploying resources at that magnitude that are critical to the business, that they are as maximally efficient as possible in the pursuit of a higher ROI. And so a tactical example here, especially with those companies that have a large retail media business or performance revenue associated with their advertising efforts, is what can I do in the first mile in real time behind consented preferences of what the end consumer wants you to do with that data? What can I do with it? Mm-hmm. And classically, that's been solved by CDPs downstream, where they are effectively the deposit, the sink, the final mile of where your data sits there, becomes system of record, and insights and audiences are derived from that large, expensive corpus of sifting through terabytes, petabytes of data. And those audiences that are created for advertising purposes are pushed out to the TikToks of the world, the Pinterests of the world, and the Facebooks of the world hours after the events have happened. What we're discussing here is what type of equivalent functionality in creating an audience can we do while the air is mid-flight, the flight, or so to speak, the data is mid-flight. And that includes when I look at a session of someone interacting with, say, a major home improvement retailer, what can I do to quantify and establish a propensity of engaging with various brands? Or is this individual likely to return via their own accord, or do they need a little bit paid media nudge when they go to Instagram? And so we are able to enrich these data objects throughout a session attached to an identity using the same type of machine learning capabilities that the downstream CDPs are doing, and oftentimes the same models that our customers want to bring to the table and enrich. We're able to do that in real time, and then effectively route that data in real time where it should go in a granular basis. And we're able to see, kind of from a common sense manner, a massive expansion on the return on ad spend associating with meeting people in the moment with a granular perspective, and then having behind the scenes where that content and individual should ultimately go when they go back to Facebook or TikTok, et cetera. We're looking at a material increase in their ROAS. And so when we think of this, it's really in the era of AI today, how much can we do from afar in that first mile in real time? And we have a great, brilliant team of engineers and other AI capabilities, as well as really creative customers who want it done then, because then there's less onus on the compute downstream where time is of the essence and it's already late to the game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, just even thinking, not that it's great for me just as a sample size of one, but just putting this anecdotally, like I know how we go about shopping things. If I'm, looking to do a little home improvement project, the experience I have in that moment, like I'm not going to debate this for like days. I'm not even going to debate it for hours. I'm going to go into a site, the way in which it, identifies intent and interest for me, is able to adjust my experience in that moment, impacts what I'm going to do. But even more so, it's that ability, this is the router and MetaRouter, it's not just about being able to use that data in the context of, say, the digital experience platform or, the e-commerce platform. It's about that ability to also now very rapidly get it elsewhere as well, too. So if like, okay, well, I'm engaging in this site, I'm looking at things and you're adapting to me, which is wonderful. But then I'm jumping out, and I'm looking at other things to have had the data, from that intent be able to very quickly proliferate into any other network where you might be able to influence my choices. I mean, that's pretty massive. I suspect maybe the super largest companies in the world, might have had some of this capability, but like for most like retailers and e-commerce providers, this capability just hasn't been there before.
Well, that's exactly right. And, yes, there's always going to be the big kahunas, right? Think of the Amazons, think of the Walmarts who have such a scale and profit pool to where they feel that, being able to build their own, assets here are critical. But then there's everyone else, right? Who is trying to fight the good fight, trying to improve their customer experience, trying to navigate this changing landscape in the era of commerce with, increasing referral traffic coming from chat modalities. My channel composition is changing, where that intent lands on a classical website or app or even their own chat type modality. What do we do with it, right? And so we're really here to be that trusted individual to let folks operate in their own environment with the equivalent functionality that the giants have, and are driving their top line earnings at margin from a lot of these RMN type programs. But just really being better stewards of their data and what can they do with it to deliver maximum value. And so you mentioned the router and MetaRouter. It really is not only within the kingdom what you do with it, but then where else in where people are spending time can you drive and deliver value back in an appropriate, responsible way, behind consent, behind privacy, in real time, with the right message, so to speak. And so It's really leveling the playing field, so to speak.
That's pretty wild. All right, we're definitely going to come back to the privacy and compliance side of things in a moment. But yeah, I saw Dave was like, bringing up a slide of things that you and I had discussed a few days ago here, of just why first-party data is more valuable than ever. And, we sort of gave a little bit of a preview of that. I guess is one thing I would just sort of add on to begin with is, it's not that third party, or even frankly from a partner perspective, second party data isn't valuable. It is valuable, but when you're, there are often multiple players who are able to participate in that same, in those same data sets. What gets really interesting is when you are able to combine those second and third party data sets with your own first party data. That actually does end up creating something that is a unique and competitive asset. So it isn't just that third party isn't relevant anymore. It's just, it's powerful when we connect it with what we actually know about a specific individual, uniquely first party. But I'd love to get some of your perspective on, some of the other things you see customers taking advantage of with first party data.
Yeah, and you hit on a really nuanced point that I do want to emphasize before we just talk about first party, is when you join third party data to first party data, it could be on an ID basis. that intersection, that tandem of that first party and third party becomes unique. It's going to continue to evolve now in the first party domain, and that third party, especially like in the era of fraud, have I seen this, user agent string before and things of that nature? And then what are folks doing in some sign up flow where I may have models that detect where that signal propensity of fraud has been enriched with the addition of that third party data, but only how does it interact in the first party context? And so going back to, this is a real interesting distinction of what you kind of kicked off the call with. Right now, all of these major AI labs, their models are all pretty good, right? You can toggle between Gemini and ChatGPT and Anthropic and open source X, Y, and Z. And, they're pretty good at amplifying human productivity for some inquiry. But in a way that data that they've been saturated is all human endeavors up to and including this point in time. This first party data has not been part of that. How people are interacting with the world, with brands, with products, etc. And so companies are in a position now, going back to building IP becoming easier, that first party data is used to help them improve their customer experience, their conversion funnel, how to speak to a customer as if it was your only customer, a one-to-one dialogue of what do I know about this individual? How can I improve their life, improve our shopping experience? And so it's not only just reshoring, bringing this data that has been historically leaking via these third-party tags. It's bringing it back, knowing that this is an increasingly valuable asset class. Between now, called the next 10 years, it is going to increasingly become more valuable because of the scarcity that it is. It's not floating out there on the web when you reshore. And so the companies that they're most keen and understand this nuance are those who are driving their own internal flywheels on improving their ad efficiency, their own conversion site experience, their own omni-channel experience across online and offline and different digital properties that are emerging or agents operating on behalf of individuals. And so this critical first mile data infrastructure operating on first party data, which may include enrichment of a third party data set that helps in subsequent decision making, is becoming the name of the game of how to effectively drive on the new Autobahn, so to speak, of how quick data is moving around from different sources and what to do with it.
So one more thing on that, I just would love to tug on the thread is, there's obviously been a lot of innovation here very recently with retail media networks. And that seems very then tied to, particularly for retailers and e-commerce folks, what they're able to actually get and do with this first party data. Can you give us just a little bit of a view of that? Yeah,
so retail media is a great example, and it's a wonderful economic incentive for companies that are standing up and growing those programs, because it's really, how do I make most value of my first party data, right? And so when you have working in the retail domain, working in the e-commerce domain, your end customers are perusing based upon their own accord, their own interests, their own, needs and wants, products that are created by different brands, right? And so when you can look at explicit engagement, you can soften that to implicit affinity to engagement via propensity modeling. You're in a position now, overlaid with how MetaRouter, some of our ID syncing that hands on the back end, expanding a pool of an addressable audience in the context of retail media who may have a brand affinity both explicitly interacted with, or they're pretty likely to interact with us based upon what we're seeing. That becomes a critical piece of monetization in these RMN networks, right? It's an important ingredient, so to speak, that goes into the dish, right? And so we're really here to help companies expand their capabilities, growth at higher margin using these data-driven techniques. And the data is already there. We're just helping connect the pipes in real time to deliver maximum value.
All right. Well, that's actually then a good segue. We've been talking a bit about like some of the, just net benefits, and what this actually, this first mile data enables. I'd love to just compare and contrast a bit some of the challenges that we've traditionally had at those first mile moments. We had been discussing three of them, previously in a call. I wonder if you can sort of walk us through what have been like the three blockers to this AI-ready marketing in the first mile, and how now you solve that.
The internet's been around, like where commerce has evolved, really, early 2000s, right? We're all familiar with the changing landscape of media commerce that we've seen over the past multiple decades. I mentioned earlier, as social media took off, as the concept of user channels took off, these walled gardens like the Facebooks of the world, et cetera, the trade has historically been from a demand gen opportunity where, get these third-party tags on your site, and when they're, on my property, I'll show them relevant content to bring them back and drive incremental revenue. That's historically been the trade. But as a result, your behavioral first-party data is being, quote unquote, leaked from the kingdom. All of that data is going into other downstream models of people who like this, also like that, and cross-sell opportunities that ultimately your competitors have been using. That's one problem. The landscape of privacy-related legislation and investments in chief privacy and compliance officers who are at the C-suite, who will have a seat at the table, supporting patterns in Europe like GDPR or California Consumer Protection Act. These are a critical stakeholder that is increasing year over year. And data privacy, data sovereignty, data governance is no longer an afterfact. It is a constraint that businesses and technical leaders need to find a way to walk the line to remain within that feasible zone, architecturally speaking, and then deliver maximum value against. And so these are like two core tailwinds here. And then we overlay it with the third. If we look at the past 25 years, the evolution of quote unquote big data, call it 2010 through 2016, the commoditization of a lot of the Apache frameworks that spun out of some of the internet giants as open source projects. Data science was really sitting on top of that, of how to deliver statistical models that determine better fraud models or personalization models. And, here we are years later in the era of generative AI, and now we're talking about where the rubber hits the road with agents doing things, not just displaying human readable content. Acting quickly at scale is oftentimes a harder problem than just operating, slowly with lots of data. And when you put those three together, you're really in this junction point of what the first mile is, how to operate in a feasible pattern in different jurisdictions and deliver that maximum value, right? And do so quickly, knowing that there is a significant degradation curve that is associated with the staleness of data and trying to find people in the moment. You've already lost them, right? And so when we look at the first mile and we look at our programmatic capabilities, whether through configurations with agentic workflows that we can do from a little afar, when we look at the capabilities of what we can do operating on streams of data, enriching them, and then dynamically routing them, almost if you had like a goalie in hockey, this puck should go, X, Y, and Z. We're in a position to kind of operate intelligently at the natural cadence and velocity of data, anchored by identity, and where that ultimate identity has approved your data to go. And that's really hard to do in real time. And it's really hard to kind of unbake that cake once it's sitting down in some giant CDP where hours and days have passed. So that's largely kind of the importance of this cascading nexus of tailwinds that industry finds itself in.
Yeah. So having this first mile data infrastructure that is under your control, great point here. Like, it makes sure now that important behavioral data is yours and yours alone to use as you want. It isn't, it's suddenly accessible to, every other possible competitor. I think you make a really strong point here about, compliance issues have only become more serious over time. And you are on the hook to, basically live up to both those regulations and, quite frankly, consumer expectations and preferences there. There can't be a delay in that. You are not off the hook in the first, second. You are on the hook from the very first touch point. And so being able to make sure that you're able to connect to that sort of privacy and compliance level of enrichment right away, phenomenal. And then what you're actually able to do with it from a customer experience, business value, business optimization perspective immediately, not further downstream in these other systems. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with the fact that you're pushing data also downstream into those other systems for other activities, and we'll probably talk a little bit about some of the benefits of you and just using this first mile to make sure that the shape of the data and the format and the structure of it is really right and consistent downstream. But I love the way you frame it. It's like a cascading, of a number of things that you get the benefit from creating this layer. I guess one question maybe to look beyond just the technology, but for the actual people involved in implementing a solution like this, who are the different people that you need to be coordinating to implement a great first mile data infrastructure solution?
This is a really key point, and this has changed a lot in the past few years for folks who've kind of been paying attention to the dynamics of decision-making internally. The advent of ChatGPT in late 22 really got corporate boards and leadership shaking a little bit of, hey, this appears to be a real deal. This seems to be a new inflection point in the technological curve that folks have been operating on for the past 20 some years. We need to find a way to make this a reality. And new entrants, new participants, new stakeholders have emerged, new patterns of how capabilities and the expectations of where software hosted by some vendor should be deployed, historically maybe operating in their own cloud, their own assets. That pendulum is heavily swung now over to an expectation that, especially involving data, sensitive data, first-party data, that needs to be deployed in my VPC, not yours. So it's really kind of this moniker of bringing models and capabilities to your data versus sending your data to their capabilities and models, right? And that really drove a lot of investments by some of the hyperscalers to meet the demand in the VPCs. And so when we look at classically what has pulled big data, what has pulled data science, then the evolution into frameworks to productionize these machine learning and data science models, PyTorch, TensorFlow, to name the two dominant ones, that have then fed into the R&D that's led to the architectures of ChatGPTs and Mistral and Anthropic and you name it. Marketing's really been the key component over the past 20 years that has driven a lot of this. What can we do with our data to increase our advertising efficiency and increase effectively our revenue per unit customer, right? And so obviously marketing, the office of the CMO, MarTech leaders have been a major proponent of moving these technical capabilities into what they are today. And especially in the processing of data at scale, the turnaround of value through modeling. Now, how do we deploy it, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we look at some of the examples here, lifetime value, what is maybe a cumulative 9-month gross profit of a particular customer of mine? Or how do I shape and understand expected conversion probability that may impact different bidding strategies, et cetera? And the second one has really emerged, where kind of the classical B2C companies, there was privacy and legal, but there was a different view of the world of those persona types than, say, working within a B2B, paradigm where you have corporations who are your end customers with their own general counsels, their own risk teams. And so there's really been this more conversation and development of policies, both internal and external, around what does data residency, governance, policies, consent, management, et cetera, look like? And then how do those capabilities from a technical standpoint play well with the aforementioned data and intelligence assets? Increasingly more on the third leg of the stool here, companies that have owned and operated their own data centers, there's obviously a need to move into a cloud-based paradigm where it's easy to spin up a new resource without having to go through some procurement cycle of buying new hardware, right? And so, the velocity of development and scale that has come from a cloud-based infrastructure, these are all trends in industry that we've seen, right? And so these have historically been the parties at the table who are driving this, who are iterating towards value. But now in the era of ChatGPT, call it generative AI, that whole umbrella theme, and this commoditization tailwind, this evolution to headless commerce where agents, units of chat modalities are operating on behalf of an individual, things are changing, right? And the sensitivity of first-party data is only being heightened. Well, at the same time, the value and what you can do with it is increasing with that additional scrutiny. So we're really in this interesting quadrant right now of how to deliver maximum value in an appropriate way in a feasible architecture that drives incremental growth to the business because it is improving the experience to the end customer.
Yeah. So yeah, just looking at those like 3 groups. So for marketers, right, this now just opens up a bunch of creativity of like new ways they can leverage this in experiences and campaigns and programs. For the privacy, legal, data governance folks, they're like, finally, like actually, we can control this. The third-party tag was really just a nightmare, for those teams. And then the third one, and this is again just such an important point about implementing this as an infrastructure, and again, kind of going back to the router and MetaRouter, is one of the things we know about MarTech stacks is they are incredibly fluid. There are new technologies that are coming in all the time. Obviously consumer expectations change around that. One of the things that's just always been challenging for marketers is when we need to be able to bring in some sort of new technology or some sort of new capability, whether it's in a pilot stage, even before it gets to full scale production. You have to get this integrated. And that's always been such a tremendous pain point. And it's one of the things that's led to, this fragmentation of data, the lack of standardization in this data here. And so I know in previous discussions we've had, we talk about, this sort of shifting left of, the data management and sort of that data control, being able to, in that first mile, get this data in a shape and a consistency, and then making it fairly easy for people to be able to okay, I'm able to send this to multiple places downstream, but that whole configuration process is something that, yes, when I come and I need to add a new technology, and I need to make sure I'm also routing data to that as well too, and having control over which data and how it's appearing. That's not like a multi-week process anymore. It's a multi-month process for some, right?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? Like I'm sitting at my dining room table right now, and it's where my family puts a lot of puzzles together. I'm personally not a puzzle guy, but the other members of the family are. And you're trying to assemble the pieces of this puzzle, and it's a complicated puzzle, right? But in the process and the time it takes to try to stitch these systems together that have been built in a different era of time, with a different velocity of data and expectations, with a different landscape of compliance and privacy and sensitivity around data, you're trying to put this complicated puzzle piece of disjoint systems that have not been organically built to play well with each other. You're trying to put them together, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure people on this call, myself very much included as a buyer of these tools over the past decade, have companies gotten the ROI from a lot of these disjointed systems is a big question, right? And I think the jury is out on that. Folks have been promised the world from a lot of these capabilities and dealing with very aggressive sales reps, and people are looking around, and I'm like, what capability and the resources are needed just to manage the disjointed puzzle, let alone the time to put them together? So what does that mean for a business? It means you're leaving money on the table, right? The time it takes to integrate a holistic offering, the time it takes to deliver and drive incremental value, that's opportunity that you're not booking revenue under the curve of time, right? And so being able to have a more holistic offering that is modern going into the year 2026, which is crazy, a few months away, things are changing, and the needs and the architectures and where budgets have been historically deployed into offerings need to be revisited. The era of AI, the era of data governance and increasing privacy, the heightened value of first-party data is mission critical. That genie's not going back in the bottle. And so I think for folks who are trying to navigate this and represent these investments to their CFO, to their CEO, while looking, across the table at members of risk who are trying to help be a strategic partner, not just a person who can negate an endeavor, but a strategic partner to find a feasible pattern. That's really where the puck is sliding, right? And when we look at this novelty, it's only accelerating. And we're seeing this in the demand for compute that has been represented in public earnings statements over the past few weeks by major players. It's only accelerating. And we're all talking to family members who are using AI more and more that you wouldn't expect. I come from a family of lawyers. And so even, the parents of the world who are both lawyers are starting to uptake these technologies. And it's a different world. It's a different interaction of data and more complex data being generated with these more chat mediums, with these higher structured interaction patterns that go beyond a click to a conversation, right? And there's a lot of value from a retailer standpoint, from an advertising perspective, nested in these higher structured signals that can be then used to better, serve that customer, and as a result, participate in the benefit from that in aggregate and grow your business.
Cool. Well, I want to make sure we have a little bit of time here for any questions from the audience as well, too. But before we sort of summarize on our end, we've talked a lot about the individual capabilities and benefits, of this first mile. Could you maybe just step back and walk us through what a day in the life of, first mile enrichment actually looks like, how it looks like from the customer's perspective, what happens in sequence, and what is the impact that ultimately has?
Yeah. MetaRouter, when we deploy our customer data infrastructure in a customer's cloud environment, let's use Google GCP as an example. Many retailers use GCP as a cloud provider. We offer a cloud agnostic solution. So it could be Azure, it could be AWS, it could be GCP, it could be your own and operated, right? We use a computational framework, an orchestration framework called Kubernetes. And this is a cluster of machines that are processing data and fanning it out to the variety of destinations as desired by the customer: Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest, Google Analytics, maybe your Snowflake environment, maybe a marketing CDP. All of that processing is happening in a MetaRouter cluster, which is deployed in your environment that you own and operate and control. And so when we look at what is done tactically in that first mile, I mentioned when customers are removing these third-party tags, they're bringing them back to kind of at the back end where handshakes, so that my ID of Patrick on the website is understood by Facebook's ID of Patrick, from Pinterest's view of Patrick, and so forth. And the purpose there is to be able to find that, Patrick when he goes to Instagram and looks at, whatever, vacations. And so that enrichment, our patented product called the Sync Injector, is operating the first mile. When that first event comes through, that enrichment, that fanning out of high handshakes, building that identity graph, all first party, owned and operated now by the customer, let's say a major retailer of ours, that is an example of first party being enriched beyond just their own view of Patrick. Well, we can take that one step further and deploy any arbitrary business logic, including machine learning models. I mentioned propensity models earlier. We're able to deploy that and introspect the holistic content of a message and where it should go or where it should be suppressed and not go. And so an example of this could be some major grocer where selling anything from ibuprofen to Gatorade, right? Under HIPAA laws and whatnot, you cannot advertise. You don't want that ibuprofen or the equivalent type of medicine making its way to an advertiser, right? And so we're able to use explicit heuristics, even named entity recognition models to introspect those the content of those data messages. And if there is a product listing that should not be routed to a inappropriate destination, we're able to remove that and scrub it in real time, right? And once again, move things in the value of maximum value to the end customer at the appropriate cadence of time needed. So there's a litany of examples in that first mile, which is arbitrary business logic, which is computation, whether invoking a customer's machine learning models of past investments by different teams, or even MetaRouter flip a switch and we'll train a model on a stream to do the aforementioned. And it affects where that data should go towards maximum value. And so when we think of every compute that's happening down in your, call it data lakes, doing Spark, doing some SQL job, doing some job of computation, there's a class that we can do, a sizable amount of compute we can do in that first mile when data is fresh, when it's mid-flight, where it should go in real time with consent. And that's a profound paradigm shift for a lot of marketers. So that first mile becomes a real opportunity to add value to our customers that they can then extend to their own customer base.
Yeah. Well, I think, to me, the big takeaway on this is just how important it is for the modern marketing leader, CMO, to really be able to understand the power and the potential, the art of the possible, with this data. It's not that the CMO has to be a data engineer themselves, but like what this capability unlocks and the competitive advantages that it can provide. This is now a crucial part of what marketing is all about. You had talked about, the era of big data, say 2010 to 2016. And we kind of got over that, right? Okay, so we have big data. The game has shifted entirely to what do we do with that data? And I've sometimes referred to this as big ops. Okay, now that we've got all this data, what's all the things that are happening on top of it? And this is so important for CMOs to understand and to develop the capability to work with this in their organization, because while marketing still has responsibility for being the storytellers, right? They still have to own the brand. They have to tell a phenomenal story. They have to understand, the customer, the consumer, and, that story that's going to resonate. But at the same time, you have to deliver the experience of that story when people are engaging with you on these sites. You need to make sure that the story propagates into all the various places where it's actually going to influence, those customers in the moment, And so I think this shift for CMOs, about being more than storytellers, but really having to be system thinkers in collaboration, with their engineering and data infrastructure folks, in collaboration, with the privacy and legal and data governance folks. It's an exciting new era. So I know we've got maybe about 10 minutes for questions or so. Maybe just, do we want to just quickly summarize, Patrick, like from your perspective, key takeaways for folks and what's next?
I really can't stress enough that there is an increasingly accelerating tailwind on the commoditization of building stuff. It's becoming easier, not only for your own team members, your own investments, but your competitors. And so the moat of time in building intellectual property is shrinking. But in doing such, the value of your first-party data and how you use it to drive better internal operating efficiencies, customer experience, your top line, the composition of your margin is becoming more critical and more differentiated. And the AI labs know this. There's a reason why they're doing so many data deals beyond kind of the public available web. There's a value assignment to data. And advertising has been, more in the marketing domain, a way to monetize data. It is extending into other mediums. So your first party data is becoming even more critical. It helps you operate your business in a differentiated posture. And companies have made considerable, very large investments in these CDPs, the Databricks of the world, the Snowflakes of the world, and arguably much of the technology that has powered these impressive companies was built pre transformer architectures, which is the core, call it neural network architecture that powers the ChatGPTs of the world and things of that nature. It's operated in a different era of time, straddled around 2016. And so these are very big line items in a cost center with opaque ROI in a lot of ways of what you're getting from them. And so having managed, contracts and organizations around such, you pose the question with these different tailwinds and capabilities in a customer's environment in that first mile. What could I just do that is done slowly, expensively, and after the fact? What could I do in the moment, in real time, and really arm the business to have more knobs and levers over the control of where that data should go towards their own objectives, given that they own the P&L associated with much of these endeavors? And what can you do in real time? And when we look at where we are today, when we look at the privileged architectural position of seeing the data anchored by identity in a customer's VPC, and then helping support where that data should go, in what shape, in what vernacular, what should be removed, enriched, added, deleted, etc., we're now in a position to help support customers navigate this dynamic landscape of first-party data and really attribute an ROI, a measurable ROI from such. And so this is something that myself and other members of the leadership team who are experienced working at major public retailers are very, very keen on supporting, knowing that we want to be trusted partners in helping companies, our customers, optimally navigate this transient that we are in. And we are in a technological transient right now. If you step back and look at what's happened in the past 2 years, 3 years, things have changed a bit, and they're going to change even more, right? And there's going to be more expectation and more dislodging of entrenched leaders who need to defend their position in market, because there are those who are trying to chop into that.
Well said. Well said. Dave, welcome back. Do you have questions you've been queuing up for us with the team?
I do. Great conversation, guys. I appreciate this. I kind of have the luxury of kind of monitoring comments as we go, and I love seeing the chatter around some of what you're talking about. So for those that ask questions, thank you for holding on for a little bit. Maybe not surprising to us anyway, but often the questions around CDPs and what's evolving with CDPs specifically and how that differentiates from CDIs or customer data infrastructure is always a good question. And a lot of just before we dive into the question, a lot of what you guys are talking about, and a lot of what MetaRouter has built and is building on the roadmap comes out of the innovation from our customers, the innovation and the challenges that our customers are experiencing. That we take that and we put that back into our product. We're formulate conversations like this and think about new tools and ways to develop solutions for really complex problems. And so it's so cool to hear the different perspectives, Scott from your side and Patrick from yours. So thank you for that. We had a question from Michael, and I have to apologize for Michael because I responded and spelled his name wrong. So just wanted to note that. But a good question here. So does MetaRouter tech make the CDP less relevant or more valuable? And is it one or the other? And so I think, Patrick, maybe a good question for you, but Scott, of course, feel free to chime in.
It's not purely mutually exclusive, right? When you look at a system of record like a CDP and different third-party data that may have been bought in a batch file, uploaded, merged into another table that then helps decorate demographic type understanding as a concrete example of first-party behavioral data, oftentimes that lives in a CDP. But when you're building an audience in a CDP, you're late to the game, right? You're late to the game, time is of the essence, and you're limited based upon the nature of that architecture, how it runs, how jobs run, They're designed as a batch processing system. Now, deriving performant data structures from a CDP, going back to when I mentioned that our customers can take their own models or their own key value stores and enrich the real-time mid-flight traffic and subsequent routing of data to create a audience in real time. Yeah, it may use artifacts that are derived from that CDP that may represent a key value store or some sort of propensity model. But that ability to move things around in real time and using modern AI and machine learning to what can we do in that first mile certainly puts downward pressure on the degree of compute needed by that CDP. If you can get clever and do things in a sophisticated mathematical way, in a performant way, mid-flight, you're able to maximize the value of that data in what shape and form, at what routed to what destination. And a CDP is going to be operating their optimization in a different domain where they're never able to optimize over the effective time. They're going to be limited by that, right? And so I think there's a real opportunity that we've seen firsthand in the performance of some of these campaigns that we've helped support of our customers. The proof is in the pudding, right? When we talk about, you know, pushing a 40% increase in ROAS, that's going back to leaving money on the table.
Yeah, I would simply, you know, one of the things that I know MetaRouter had previously been called a CDP's best friend.
Yep.
You know, and I think one of the things that always struck me about that was, yeah, okay, there's a whole set of new capabilities and new use cases, or, you know, improved use cases that you're able to do in this first mile. But at the same time, you are getting, you know, very high quality first party data at the moment of collection here. You're making sure that it's compliant. You're making sure that it, you know, is properly identified. Passing this stuff into the CDP is actually a real benefit to then all of these other downstream use cases, you know, that might not be the real time use cases, but could be so many other ways, you know, in which we're doing campaigns and loyalty programs and, yeah, even like our analysis of understanding our market better. So, I kind of like the thought that, well, it's actually both.
I would agree with that. And CDP's best friends, you know, a great way to position, I think, ourselves to wrap that up. I mean, I think we slot in next to or before your CDP, right? And so I think that's a great point. And thanks for calling that out, Scott. So we have another question actually relevant to CDPs. This one, you know, give an example for Adobe CDP. So what are the most common integration points between MetaRouter and platforms like Adobe CDP? I mean, again, Patrick, I think you're best suited to kind of answer that one. But we talked, I think we gave a couple examples. But, you know, what's your take?
Is this, I see there's, okay, maybe that's a comment or a question. Dave, do you mind? So this is basically, how do we play with like Adobe's CDP? Is that effectively the distillation?
Yeah, exactly.
Of that
And I think what are the additional activation channels that we most commonly kind of power beyond just CDP?
Well, that's great, right? When we talk about activation, and I love that vernacular, because we're really trying to activate and derive a value assignment from data, which largely determines in what shape and what destination it needs to go to, right? Like I alluded to a litany of different advertising related destinations. When we look at, call it more home shopping type websites where someone is discovering and putting together a theme for a new living room, as an example. There's a lot of moving parts. It's not just a one-off purchase. It's kind of a whole aesthetic. You know, being able to route those and activate that signal, that data in real time. There are different companies, think of Pinterest of the world, who largely would benefit from, you know, maybe where that conversation is happening outside of that home goods e-commerce website. Maybe they're putting together ideas in Pinterest, and we're able to activate and kind of share, you know, what is appropriate on behalf of our customer, overlaid with the customer's consent. They may say no to advertising, but yes to analytics. And we see that in real time. And we to dynamically route and suppress where that data should go in real time in that moment, right? And so you're really kind of walking the line correctly in maximizing privacy and compliance. But that would be an example of, hey, Pinterest, being able to advertise there in a contextually relevant way with more nuance and moving parts. You're building that audience in real time. And it's often the best audience is an audience of one, right? It's not necessarily a troop of, non-identical things, right? You're speaking to every individual directly. And I think that's really what benefits the real-time activation paradigm versus lookalikes, so to speak.
Yeah, no doubt. And we're seeing a lot of conversation, a lot of changes with that too. So Patrick, thank you. Scott, thank you so much. We're at the hour. I'd love to take a couple more questions, but I respect people's time, or I'm trying to respect people's time anyway. So there's so much to uncover. The good news is there's so much changing. Let's do this again. We'll update the conversation here in a couple of weeks and see what happens. But thank you both for joining us, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. This recording will be sent out and available on our YouTube channels and our website. If you want to have a conversation with MetaRouter too, don't hesitate. We love these type of conversations. We love hearing about what's going on in the industry or different retailers or hospitality, organizations, whatever it may be. These conversations are what keep us going. And we come up with creative ways to solve really complex problems, for a lot of the world's largest retailers and beyond. So this is what fuels us. This is what gets us up in the morning, and AI is just adding to that fire. So we're delighted. Scott, thank you again. Patrick, thank you. And for everyone else tuning in, drop us a line, or we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Cheers.